Welcome to Victory Garden Live. Today we're going to talk about invasive plants. Some of them just pop up in our gardens. Some of them are ones we plant intentionally but need to be careful with. Sometimes we actually want a plant to be invasive. Maybe we want a nice thick ground cover on a hilly area of our land. Most of the time we don't want them taking over our garden beds and crowding out other plants. So we are going to look at a few examples today. First one we're going to talk about is milkweed. And actually, speaking of invasives, you can see that this milkweed has Japanese beetles on it. Speaking of invasive things, the Japanese beetles are really a little bit of an issue here in our area this year because of the type of weather we've had. So we're going to see quite a few of those while we're looking around. So we have already talked about how important milkweed is for the ecosystem. It's the only plant that monarch butterfly caterpillars can feed on, and it's host to several other butterflies and beetles. If we look at this one over here, we can see some of these milkweed beetles there on it. And you can see they get quite tall. This plant is pretty tall right now. You can see these flower buds starting. So it is an important plant. But it's important to remember when planting it, though, to put it in a space where you don't mind if it spreads and to pull out any unwanted plants. Because you can see we have a couple plants here, and next thing you know, we have a lot of milkweed plants popping up. You should wear gloves when you pull the plants out because of the sap. You should also make sure to remove the seed pods before they open. Each milkweed pod contains a large number of seeds, generally 50 to 100 per pod, and they spread easily because of the parachute-like fibers that are attached to them. The plants also spread by deep rhizomes. That's why they spread so much in this one area, even though the seed pods were removed. So even if you remove the seeds, they're going to spread by those roots. So I would say enjoy them, plant them somewhere that it's appropriate, but make sure to be careful and take out the unwanted plants. The next invasive plant we're talking about is morning glory. There are over 1,000 species in the morning glory family. As the name implies, most of them have flowers that open up in the morning, and the plants prefer a sunny spot. This particular vine doesn't really have a lot of flowers open right now. You can just see one here, and you can see a couple that are still a little curled up. Unfortunately, some of these species are very invasive. They grow as long, trailing vines, and those vines climb over and smother out the plants around them like they're doing to this barberry. You can see they're just kind of growing right up and in it. As of 2021, it is illegal to cultivate, possess, and sell most non-native species of common morning glory in the state of Arizona, for example, because they've realized it is such an issue. It just wants to smother this barberry. So it's easy enough to just rip the vines down. That is very easy. A lot of people think the flowers are pretty. They leave this plant in their flower beds when it shows up, but be careful because even though it's easy to rip down those vines, the roots break. They have really fragile roots, little tiny roots. So when you pull these up, the roots just end up breaking right off. And then you have a big problem because all those roots are still in the ground. They're just going to keep coming up. So you really need to make sure that you're being really persistent and digging up those roots as soon as you can. Number 3 on our list today is purple nightshade. I believe that's what this is. I've tried looking it up. This is another plant that grows with long vines and is going to smother plants around it. That's what it's doing to this potentilla. You can see this potentilla and, of course, the Japanese beetle trying to survive. But this purple nightshade is trying to take care of that problem for it. You can see all these little berries that are coming up. So again, I'm not sure exactly what type this is. So if anyone watching has more information about this plant, please let me know in the comments. From what I found, it sounds like many types are toxic and especially toxic to dogs. So if you're removing this, just to be on the safe side, make sure you're wearing gloves and that you're washing afterwards, and keep children and pets away while you're digging it out. The next one we're talking about today is mint. I think most of us know by now, don't plant mint in the ground unless you don't mind it spreading. Mint will really take off. It can actually be a nice ground cover. You know, if there's somewhere where you'd like mint, maybe you kind of want to walk. Some people will do that with thyme. They'll plant thyme in areas where they want to walk, and then that way it releases this nice fragrance when you walk there. But usually, because mint spreads so much, you'll want to keep it in pots with your other herbs. Same thing goes for oregano. It can be really nice to have a little bit of a field of oregano planted. The bees love it, but again, it's going to spread because it is in the mint family. One interesting thing to notice on this particular mint is you can see these brown spots on the leaves. These are actually because of a certain type of fly that will lay its eggs in the mint like this. And it does it to oregano too, because it's in that same family. So if you see this, it's better to go ahead and trim the plants to the ground, use a kind of a soap spray to help try to kill all those little eggs. And you know, probably the next year what will happen is then your plant will come up and you'll be helping to get rid of that infestation. But right now, that's what those little brown spots are if you happen to see those on your mint. And again, if you don't want it to spread, keep it in a pot. Next on our invasive species list are wild roses. So I love roses. So it is really sad to me that some wild roses are invasive and really do need to be removed. You know, when one shows up because the seed was dropped there by a bird or a little animal, it seems like a gift. Like, wow, look at this. It's like this pretty little rose plant that just popped up. But all of a sudden, those rose bushes that started off just seeming like tiny little things, you know, a little gift from nature, are going to turn into this giant monstrosity of wild rosebush. This rose is called Rosa multiflora. You can find very good information about this type of rose on the New York Invasive Species Information website. According to this website, this rose is native to eastern China, Japan, and Korea. It was introduced to the U.S. from Japan in 1866 as rootstock for grafted ornamental rose cultivars. In the 1930s, its use spread because it was used by the U.S. Soil Conservation Service for erosion control and as natural hedges to control livestock. It has also been used in highway dividers. It is currently found in 41 states, and 14 of those states have measures to control it. The main way to identify this rose is that at the base of each leaf stalk, we have these fringe stipules. Let's see if we can find some. And again, you can see all this damage that's being done by the Japanese beetles. Let's see, can you see the little fringe there? Here's a good spot. See that little feathery look right there? That's how we can tell that this is Rosa multiflora. Because, you know, some roses don't spread like this. But this is kind of the telltale sign that this is the Rosa multiflora and that it needs to go. These roses can grow and spread up to 10 or 15 feet in height and 9 to 13 feet in width, so they can quickly overtake an area. The roots spread, and when the tips of canes touch the ground, they can root and create new plants. So that's how you end up with a large thicket of these. So the best way to remove them is to protect yourself with long sleeve leather gloves. You can find those in plenty of places online. You're going to want to cut the canes and bag them up. Don't put them in the compost, or they could just root there. And you know, it's best to not put things with thorns in your compost anyway, because then you just have to deal with those thorns in there. So after you bag up those canes, you're going to dig up the roots and dispose of those too. They'll probably continue to pop up for a while because there will still be roots underground. So you'll just have to stay on top of it once you remove them. Possibly the most invasive plant we'll talk about today is crown vetch. There's a lot of good information about this plant on the website for the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, so some of this information today comes from there. Crown vetch is native to Central and Eastern Europe and regions of Asia and Africa. It was introduced to the U.S. as early as the mid-1800s, and by the 1950s it became widely planted as a ground cover, a cover crop, and a bank and slope stabilizer along roads and waterways. And that's because it has these roots that really hold on, and it's going to spread and spread, so it actually is good for those purposes. Vetch prefers open, sunny spaces and is tolerant of most soil types. So you've probably seen areas of vetch along the roadways, and the flowers really are pretty. Some of these have kind of passed their prime, so it's hard to really get good example of how this looks when it's really full, but you can kind of see there are some newer flowers, along with some of those little asters that are in there. We've got some fleabane popping up in there. So the flowers really are pretty, and honestly, the leaves have a nice shape to them. You know, it's pretty, it fills in a space, it looks unusual. This is what prompts some people to dig them up and plant them in their yards, but don't do it. It is not a good idea. Crown vetch overtakes and suppresses other vegetation. You can see what it's doing to this rose bush over here. There is indeed more rose bush underneath there, but it's underneath all that crown vetch. It overtakes and suppresses the other vegetation, which reduces species diversity and wildlife habitat. Due to its creeping growth habit, it can cover and shade out other plants and eventually form dense monocultures. This area is just going to turn into an entire area of just vetch if we let it. Infestations over time can cover several acres of land. Crown vetch spreads by long underground main roots with a large root system that branches off of that. The root system spreads very aggressively. You can pull up sections of vetch, but the roots almost always break at some point. It's virtually impossible to get all of the root because there are so many branching sections of it. Even if it looks like it's gone, there's still root under there and the plants are going to pop up again. You know, it's actually very impressive. I mean, crown vetch is a true survivor when it comes to plants. And there can be places it's useful. Say you have a very sloped area of land that you never want to plant other things and you don't want to have to mow it. You know, that's how it started being used in this country in the first place. But it's never going to be gone once it's planted somewhere. The best thing to do is to remove as much as possible if you are trying to get rid of it, and to just stay on top of it. For large areas, control can be done by controlled burning or by using pesticides, which I don't like to recommend and honestly don't always work with vetch. But that will only be a partial solution. There will still need to be vigilant control. So these are just a few of the invasive species that are common here. There are a few others right in this bed that we could talk about, but we'll probably save some of those for other episodes that are specific to those plants. Let me know in the comments if there are other invasive plants that you're familiar with and what you do to keep them in check. So again, I am Melissa Bauco, and thank you for joining me this week.